But the question, I mean, I think he did well from their perspective for the reasons that you say, John, and he used the gallery very skillfully to kind of simulate empathy, which is a thing that he's been lacking.
And look at the growth President Trump made over the speech. So pre-speech, it was 54% of speech watchers said his policies will move the U.S. in the right direction. After the speech, that number goes up 10 percentage points.
So we are now watching the stages of grief where Democrats and liberal analysts are slowly having to come to grips with the fact that Trump's State of the Union was a massive political success, which it was. Not only was it arguably his best State of the Union ever, but as I stated, he needed to reclaim the narrative from Democrats on key issues like the economy and immigration, and he absolutely did that. But we're even getting some quiet rumblings that perhaps Democrats did not do themselves any favors with the usual embarrassing antics, counter events, and protests, to which I say, really? You mean to tell me this was not appealing to ordinary Americans and reminded everyone what absolute freaks your political party is? Color me so surprised.
I'm fresh out of an ICE prison in Minneapolis. I've been arrested 3 times by ICE over absurdity, over us being ourselves, over me singing songs like, "Hey, Mr. Tangerine Man, get rid of brown people for me. I'm Aryan white. There ain't no place I'm going to." And then all of a sudden, he's not ready for primetime player ICE agents with 2 weeks of training come after me. I got arrested in Portland. I got arrested in Minneapolis in the last 3 weeks twice. But they can't erase a movement, all right?
Now, before you ask, yes, that was real. That is actual footage of a Democrat counter event held to the State of the Union that actual members of Congress were speaking at. You can watch our previous video if you still don't believe me. But as usual, Democrats were tasked with something very simple. Don't look like complete freaks. Try to act normal for about 2 seconds. They utterly fail because these people are not normal and the freak show is just continuing. But internally, top Democrat leadership has to be imagining this is a really bad look for us. And that's why in today's video, I want to go through the stages of grief from the denial to the acceptance, right? The initial Democrat reactions to the State of the Union where they're proudly saying, yes, we stood for illegal aliens. We refused to stand for Americans. We admitted that's what our political party is all about. Then the exit polls or the snap polls come in showing, hey, Americans seem to really like this State of the Union. It was very popular, which then creates a shift where suddenly characters like David Axelrod and even Nancy Pelosi are quietly appearing to admit, yeah, maybe we might have handled this whole thing wrong. So let's get into all of it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all the latest news and coverage. And that said, I did remark, even in our initial reaction, I thought the single most defining part of the State of the Union is when Trump gets up there and asks the question to all the representatives, if you believe that the primary duty of American government is to advocate first for American citizens and not illegal aliens, please stand up. And the Democrats didn't stand up. It was just total mask off. Yes, Democrats are the party not of American citizens, but of illegal aliens. But of course, we did get the response from some Democrat reps trying to argue that that very question was somehow racist and uncomfortable and blah, blah, blah. And all I can say is, folks, this is them digging themselves, yes, an even deeper hole.
What did you think about that moment when the president was asking Democrats to stand up for American citizens during that part of the speech when he was talking about immigration and immigration enforcement efforts?
I think you can agree with the what, like standing up for American citizens, but I disagree with the how. And so it's always about how do we bring our country together, but not stand on the backs of others. There's thinly veiled racist language, anti-immigrant language in what he was asking, and that was uncomfortable.
Well, no, actually, it's not that complicated. Time is limited in the day. resources are finite, which is a brutal lesson that Democrat states are having to learn currently with their financial budgets. As we've been talking about, money's not free. You can't just print it out of thin air. And so, yes, when it comes to investing finite resources into a group of people, is it a government's job to invest that into their own citizens or into foreigners? This is not a complicated question. And yes, there is an either or, right? Because there are certain policies that benefit illegals but don't benefit citizens. As one example, flooding the labor markets with tens of millions of people from the third world absolutely does benefit those third worlders who are improving their quality of life. So what does it do at the same time? It suppresses wages for American citizens. It starves finite housing resources and makes the so-called affordability crisis that Democrats are so obsessed with absolutely explode. But of course, Democrats find that to be uncomfortable because really, what are they saying? It's racist, it's this or that. No. What you're admitting, yes, is that when that push comes to shove, we're going to bankrupt our state for our own citizens, like California, by giving out Medicaid to illegal aliens. We do prioritize the illegal alien. That is the constituency we serve. And all Democrats basically were doing there was being honest about it. But it didn't stop there. Even before the speech, we had some CNN analysts trying to mock the quote-unquote so-called angel moms. These are people who lost their children's lives, right? Their children were murdered by illegal aliens, and CNN seems to think it's some type of one big joke.
Oh, I think we're actually getting a little preview of kind of the theme of his address later today at the White House when he hosts the so-called angel moms. And so really focusing on immigration as he kicks off his big State of the Union week.
The so-called angel moms, you say? The parents of people who were killed by so-called illegal aliens? Well, in that case, I guess let's ask the question of how Americans actually perceived this message on immigration and other key issues. Because according to CNN's own poll, after watching the speech, 64% of respondents said that Trump's policies would move the U.S. in the right direction. Only 36% said wrong. And noticeably, public approval opinion of Trump did seem to increase throughout the course of the speech, which I could have told you that, right? We sort of all knew watching this that it was a good speech, but, liberals wanted to be in denial for so long. Oh, it's just all political propaganda. No one is compelled by this. No one is moving. Don't worry. The midterms in 2028 are locked in the bag already. Americans are super against ICE. They're super with us. And then, wait a minute, reality starts to set in. And then you start to see them shift.
But among speech watchers tonight, 64% say his policies will move the U.S. in the right direction. And look at the growth President Trump made over the speech. So pre-speech, it was 54% of speech watchers said his policies will move the U.S. in the right direction. After the speech, that number goes up 10 percentage points. So Donald Trump made some progress with people watching the speech from their pre-speech expectations to what they saw in the speech itself. And that 64% number, that's pretty much in range across all of his State of the Union addresses. In his first term, last year, the joint session, that's about what we've seen. Is roughly 2/3 have walked away from his speeches thinking he's going to move it in the right direction.
So a lot of red meat for the base.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. If you're a Republican on the ballot in 2026, I think you leave this speech being as happy as you could possibly be that he sort of stuck to the script on the economy. He gave the red meat to the base on immigration, and they can leave the hall tonight and sort of take that out on the campaign trail.
So yes, undeniably, that's a big number and a big shift. Although I would point out to a degree, CNN is still kind of coping about this. You notice the excuse that they use. Oh, this was popular with the base. The approval rating went up with the base. And don't get me wrong, I think it is a good point. The Republican base does need some energy going into the midterms, and so it was a good rallying cry. But in terms of whether or not they support Trump's policies, I don't know how to break this to you, but most of Trump's base already supports Trump's policies. That's why they're the base. You know what that 10% was? And you know what is the worst news potentially for Democrats? That 10% are the independents. the moderates, maybe the people who lean Republican but are sort of squishy. They've been falling for recent Democrat propaganda on ICE, on immigration, on this whole affordability tagline that Democrats are inventing despite being the party of unaffordability. And this speech tonight, as I pointed out, was Trump reining that back in, right? Recapturing the narrative and explaining, no, Democrats are the radicals on immigration. Democrats are the incompetent, expensive fools on the economy. And that's in reality here what actually happened, but still nonetheless, the number there is significant because yes, that 10% indicates, partisan bias aside, that speech got through to the people who matter. The independents, and yeah, certainly the base liked the speech undeniably, so there you have that. But all of that in mind, I think kind of coming to grips with this understanding is when you start to see a shift. And one prime example of that comes from crazy Nancy Pelosi, who of course likely saw Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib make a stupid scene in the speech tonight. I argued it was an embarrassing moment for Democrats, just not a good look. Again, your whole goal in this moment is to just not look crazy. And Nancy Pelosi, noticeably, instead of defending the behavior, tries to really downplay it and pretend like it didn't happen, right? She wants to shift away from that because, again, she's trying to say, no, don't make us look crazy. Don't dig us an even deeper hole. Although perhaps maybe in defense of that, she was just extremely drunk tonight, which is why she just doesn't remember what happened. Nonetheless, take a listen to her reaction to the whole Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib political stunt, the screaming that you heard inside of the speech.
And enact serious penalties for public officials who block the removal of criminal aliens, in many cases drug lords, murderers all over our country. They're blocking the removal of these people out of our country, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
That was hardly noticeable in the room. It may have been more noticeable on TV.
It was hardly noticeable is the new excuse that Nancy Pelosi is trying to use, as Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar quite literally were screaming at the top of their lungs. But I suppose it makes sense, Nancy, if you were, let's say, sedated while you were in that room. You were in a compromised state. You couldn't hear that well. You couldn't see or sense that well. And some of the pictures from tonight do seem to indicate that. But again, what's really going on? Democrats are trying to downplay the embarrassment that they made for themselves. But finally, we get the admission from David Axelrod, who, let's not forget, was the former senior advisor and basically the architect behind Barack Obama's political rise in his past campaigns, finally is forced to basically admit, yeah, Trump's State of the Union may have actually been a success. He actually might have used the crowd in the room very skillfully. Take a listen.
I would not be surprised at all if he helped himself there. That's not enough. That's not enough. One speech is not going to change anything. But the Republican Party needs its base enthusiastic heading into the midterm election year. And there was a lot in the speech from the president, both from a policy perspective of what he's done and what he's trying to do, and the few skirmishes he had with the Democrats, that if you're trying to get your base to say, okay, I've been sort of pulled back, Washington's too loud, I don't like the fighting, I don't like a lot of Latino Republicans I talked to, I don't like seeing ICE in the streets of America, you might get a little bit of them back in the fight.
And that is what was so important about tonight. He nailed the Republican base, brought them back in the fold with a solid message on the economy, on immigration, on his foreign policy. That is the work he had to do. And that also brings over a lot of independents that are similarly minded to what Republicans believe.
Not sure about that part, but we'll see.
That's actually how the presidential election modeled out, and will be very instructive and important for the midterms. But between now and the midterms, he has to maintain his control of Republicans on the Hill. He did that and did that in spades.
Well, he also basically kept control of himself, which I think will be a great relief to his strategists and aides there. But the question, I think he did well from their perspective for the reasons that you say, John, and he used the gallery very skillfully to kind of simulate empathy, which is a thing that he's been lacking, and that's sort of a surrogate for that. The question is, he started off the speech by saying, this is the turnaround for the ages. Right. And as you know, because you're traveling around the country, people don't think the direction is right. And I don't think this cured that. So we'll see. But I don't think a lot of the people who needed to be persuaded probably were watching this speech.
Well, I think even CNN's own poll may disagree with you on that last point, but honestly, coming from David Axelrod, I have to take that as very high praise, right? If he's saying it succeeded in some areas and I think, it was good, but hey, I have this question, what they're really trying to say is that it was a massive success. It had to have been at least a 12 out of 10. Because if it were just a 10 out of 10, maybe even a 9 out of 10, you know what the response would be. He's going senile. He was unhinged and unstable. He was an authoritarian, this, blah, 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 that. So the fact that they're kind of having this genuinely nuanced conversation of, it's like pretty good in some areas, maybe have some questions, then what that means coming from partisan liberals is that with the center and the people who did actually matter in this audience, yes, it was a crushing, massive success. And frankly, I think you're watching a Democrat Party right now that knows going forward, they're currently on the back foot, right? I will admit they've enjoyed a good couple of months riding the high momentum, and frankly, it sucks that this has been a low point of Trump's presidency, given the fact that the whole situation in Minneapolis was entirely provoked by Democrats and the left. They caused that whole thing, and now it's been the case that conservatives and the right wing and the Trump administration have to be kind of backpedaling, apologizing, trying to rationalize, and it's like, no, it's total propaganda. It's total nonsense. But that said, from the political analysis perspective, I will acknowledge, yes, last couple of months for Trump, maybe not exactly a strong point, but again, this is how you reset the narrative. This is how you once again reassert, no, Republicans are the party of economy and immigration. Those are our strong suits. You're not going to take that from us. Yes, Trump is going to get out there and openly call out how dishonest Democrats are when they remotely try to virtue signal about that. And then, by the way, let's even resurrect some other issues in the national consciousness like crime, which we shouldn't forget is arguably the single worst thing that Democrats do, right? Don't get me wrong. Economy, major issue. Immigration, major issue. But the fact that they're literally letting out 72-time repeat offenders so that they can go stab you out in the streets may be the single greatest threat to the safety of everyday Americans. And this is, of course, something that's all a result of left-wing, woke, whatever you want to call it, communist policy. So there you have another one, right? So you want to have a conversation about national issues? Let's talk about those national issues now, Democrats, right? You want to talk about economy? Let's talk about the way Democrats handle the economy, how they handle immigration, how they handle crime. Again, the big point tonight was what? To remind the American people of who the Democrat Party actually is. And I would argue between Trump's speech, which focused somewhat on, hey, this is my stance, but this is also their stance. And by the way, all the cartoonish, clownish antics, Democrats absolutely walked right into that trap. The American people are going to now have a chance to, hey, let's not just talk about Trump and where we disagree with Trump. What about the Democrats, though? What do we think of Democrats? Oh, wait, these people are insane. That's exactly what's going on. And there you have it. So that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.